Hello, welcome to the Hirewell Recruiting Insights podcast. I'm your host, James Hornick, partner at Hirewell. Special guest this week. The topic this week is employer brand. And joining me is a special guest, the employer brand team lead at Relativity, Kylie Denk.
Hello.
So you have like an entourage who's been like following you on LinkedIn.
Everyone is very kind. It's very nice to see that, but I suppose a little bit.
I got a lot of, I promoted this like a couple times and it was definitely a big following from the Relativity crowd. So it was good to see. So if you guys give us, I was gonna say, if you came specifically for Kylie, hit the applause emoji. That way we can see how deep you roll. Why don't you first introduce yourself? So I want to make sure people understand your background as well as Relativity, because people who follow us in Chicago probably know who Relativity is, but we have a lot of followers like outside of Chicago who may not know. So just to give some context.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm from Wisconsin, grew up, born and raised in Madison. Actually went to UW-Madison as well and studied communications there. So that's how I started off my career, was with that degree. Actually moved to Chicago right after I graduated. So I've been here about 7 years now. Started off in a company where I did a lot of large-scale event work, so the fun stuff like music festivals, mud runs, all of that, and more of my office portion of the role was recruiting, so that's where I got into the recruiting side of things.
Okay.
And almost 4 years ago, I actually joined Relativity, which was then K-Cura, so about 2.5 years ago, rebranded. And that's where I started campus recruiting, and probably a year into that, with employer branding, I have to give some credit to my first manager probably, because she brought up this certification in employer branding, and I hadn't heard much about it. And she told me, like, hey, let's use our training budget. Let's try this out. And I said it sounded like a great idea, kind of marrying this recruitment experience I had with marketing interests that I had. And got the certification and just realized there's so much more to be done with employer branding. And we were doing some, but there was so much more strategy we could do with it and more stories we could tell. So that's where it kind of got started with employer branding. So
employer branding is one of my favorite topics because like everyone thinks they knows what it is, but if you ask them, okay, what do you do in employer branding? Everyone's like, it's kind of like marketing and recruiting at the same time, which is my extent of my knowledge. It really was extent of my knowledge until fairly recently. How would you define employer branding? It's a very undefined field, so I know it's very broad and people focus on very different things, but in terms of your world and Relativity and kind of what you focus on, like what is it exactly?
Yeah, so for us, we define employer branding as sort of the perception that people have of us as a workplace. So that could be our current employees, it could be potential customers, stakeholders, definitely potential candidates as well. So that's how we see employer branding. I definitely do sometimes when I'm trying to explain it to my mom or whoever else, one of my friends, they say recruitment marketing, and that certainly comes up quite a bit as well.
And turns out that's a completely different thing, which I didn't even know until like 2 months back that, I think I was talking to Nate Guja, who got us introduced, and he was like, so like employer branding and the others are two different things. I'm like, I knew that, sure.
Yeah, well, shout out to Nate too. Yeah. I would think of employer branding as almost the what, right? So that's our perception, what people think of us in terms of being a workplace of choice. And then I think of recruitment marketing as the how, sort of. So it's how we're telling our story, it's how we're getting our company mission and values out into the world to attract these candidates and to just get that brand recognition in general. So that's with our event work, it's with our digital marketing strategy, it's sort of the how of what we're doing in employer branding. So they are certainly connected, but definitely a little bit different.
Okay. One thing was, and you touched on this slightly already, but when we met for coffee a few weeks back, I was interested in like who gets into employer brand, what people are drawn to it, who has the most success, like who finds it the easiest to pick up.
Yeah, I would say I usually, from other people I've met, it's been either in more of the HR, talent acquisition space, recruiting, or marketing. So it's probably a pretty 50-50 split, I would say, in terms of who gets into this. I think you can definitely learn it as well if you take the time to do that. But yeah, typically it's people with either one skill set or the other, or maybe you have both, and then you're the perfect fit for employer branding.
What I find interesting in general is I think, because that's high level when you're talking about a company doing employment branding. One of my biggest things I think for recruiters, especially going forward as I think consumers, so job seekers or who ultimately your consumer is, I think are becoming so much more they're sick of being sold to in general,
that's
but
true.
also just the way that the consumer brands have presented themselves. Like ever since the iPhone, like you've got a computer in your pocket that can tell you the weather, can do all your email, you can order your Amazon delivery, like whatever. So you expect like a certain level of like sophistication out of whoever's marketing to you and whoever's like creating a product and whatnot. And I think that for on the lower level recruiters, the people who are having an easier go of it right now, the people who have like a marketing mindset that you know, even on an individual level, take a lot of the same principles and stuff you're working on it and figure out how to apply it to themselves. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, coming from the recruitment background and just having that mindset of the candidate experience and whatnot is super valuable, I think, to being part of employer branding.
Let's talk a little bit about what channels do you use? Like, what's the high level? Like, what's kind of your plan of attack as you guys see it, and what's your strategy? Without giving too much weight to competitors, but whatever you're willing to share.
Yeah. No, well, so we break it down into a couple of different buckets, I would say. So we think about employer brand at Relativity more internally, which would be our kind of current employees and internal engagement piece. And with that, we have a couple brand ambassador programs. Those have been pretty successful with us, just to get participants to share their story and people who are really interested in doing that. But then we also think about the external component. So the other two buckets, I would say, would be more of our recruiting events. And, you know, are we sponsoring conferences and showing up at career fairs and even hosting events on site at our office, and the digital marketing piece too. We have a really strong partnership with our marketing team, and they'll also assist with some of our social media, public relations, web design, things like that. So the three buckets, we kind of break it into our, the internal engagement piece, the events, and more of the digital marketing strategy.
Internal engagement is one thing that I think, because you guys are like 1,000 people roughly.
Yeah, we just surpassed 1,000. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, so it's like in order for you guys, like you're at that level where you have to have like a structure of kind of delivering that message.
Yeah.
But I always thought that any company that's trying to hire, they need to view their recruitment team, or in your case, your employee branding team, whatever, as really every stakeholder in the organization who's going to have interaction with the job seekers potentially, which is frankly almost everybody, right?
Right.
So it's not just, I think where some companies struggle is they think that in smaller companies, they have a recruiter doing it, or maybe they have an HR person and that's their job to worry about this kind of stuff, where really the companies have because really it's about making it easier to hire and making yourself a more attractive place to work, which makes your recruiting efforts easier.
Exactly.
But companies have the mindset that the hiring manager, the team that reports to them, anybody in HR and recruiting, like they're all part of the hiring team and have to have a unified message.
Right.
Which is why I think what you guys are doing with like our brand ambassador program is pretty interesting, because that's the entire point of it, is to get, because those guys get everyone on their teams on the same page and how to present. Okay.
You're right. Yeah, we try and really have ambassadors from each department of the business, and even on a team level, that's even better. But yeah, they're really sort of the advocate for us to make sure we're all on the same page, and then they can also in return bring things back to us. You know, any concerns they're seeing, maybe some cool new tricks of the trade that we might not even be aware of. So it's really a cohesive effort, I would say, with our brand ambassador program.
Okay. It's a growing field. So, and I think here's the thing: everybody has an employment brand.
Yes.
Whether or not you actually do anything with it,
That's
like you at your company, no matter what your company is, like you're watching this right now, your company has an employment brand.
It's very true.
It's either something you proactively work on and it's good, or maybe you don't work on it and you're just a good company and you get word of mouth, or it kind of sucks. And so that's really the art of the whole thing, is that this is not like a field you have to decide whether or not you're going to get into. Like, you're in this field. It's whether or not how proactive you want to be in terms of being with it. Where, in terms of the actual like companies doing what you're doing, in terms of taking a proactive stance, like where do you see that? Like, who's doing it right now? What companies have you seen? Because that's like, your competitors in this space aren't your competitors, product competitors.
Correct.
They're your talent competitors, which is a completely different thing.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, at Relativity, we're mostly, our customers are largely in the legal industry, so law firms, big corporations, government clients, and so they're utilizing our software product that just lets them organize their data for litigation purposes mostly. Now, what we're hiring is mostly software engineers, sales account folks, customer support, really any department you can think of in a traditional business, and so that's not always within the legal industry at all. So it's definitely interesting. I would say companies I've been seeing doing this are some of the larger companies, and especially B2C companies. They already have a little bit of that edge up in terms of the consumer recognition. But But I think Adidas does it really well. Southwest Airlines, you hear a lot about their customer service, and they're showing that too with their workplace. Well, Netflix you hear about. GE, you've probably seen the Millie Dresselhoff commercials and things like that, which was new for me. I was like, I didn't know there would be commercials for employer branding, but we're getting to that almost.
Yeah. Do you think being in B2B, it's that much more important that you do it? Because, I think it's some of these B2B, like, you got to imagine Google and Apple probably have a pretty easy time of it, right?
Right.
But it's companies that aren't consumer products that are lesser known inherently that probably need to spend more time on it, is what I'm assuming.
I definitely think so. I mean, you could be B2C and have a completely different workforce need than what your product is, or people might have if you're maybe a really industrial company, maybe you have some different battles you need to fight with messaging in terms of being a modern workplace, though, or, different things there. But yeah, I think B2B is definitely an area that we'll need to work on this a little bit more just to get more of that general recognition, like you mentioned. I see Salesforce doing it well, SAP, definitely some of the larger companies, but like you said, anybody could be utilizing this, and it's important for just about every size company. It's just a matter of if you have the resources, if you're proactively working on it, that kind of thing.
Okay. What about, one of the things I like to do kind of with this podcast in general is I want to make it like focused on companies who are trying to hire and trying to get into new things that a lot of them are startups and places like that like they might not even have recruiters or HR people. What advice, take things back. I mean, you guys are not huge, but you're pretty big, compared to most companies out there. If you were a smaller company, if you were 20 people, 50 people, where they frankly can't really have a dedicated EB practice. What advice would you give companies like that if they want to take a proactive stance with enhancing the brand they have, even if it's just like a few people here kind of part-time doing what they need to?
Well, honestly, I have about 3 things I would say, and then I'll give you kind of a caveat, though.
Okay.
So one thing is definitely your employer brand. At Relativity, we really think it should stem from your corporate brand. So it's not just a standalone brand that you have to start from scratch and recreate the wheel. It should actually be part of what you already have in place with your corporate brand. So that should help a little bit in terms of not having to think of all new messaging and all that. But also just really utilize your employees. I mean, storytelling and evoking some sense of emotion is what everyone wants to see and what people connect with and remember. Actually tapping into your employees. They're already working with you. A lot are willing to share their story, and there's cool things happening every day that you might be missing. Someone might love to write. They could write some blog content or post things on your website. So you can definitely utilize your employees, and if you have an office space, if you're at that size yet, I would say utilize that as well. Sometimes we see more hires and sort of traction with our on-site events like open houses or meetups that we're hosting than we might even with some of the larger conference sponsorships or things that cost more money and take a lot more work. So those 3 things I think are definitely what I would focus on if you don't have quite as many people or the resources to dedicate to this. All with the caveat that you have to first look at your internal work environment.
Yeah,
right?
I was actually going to jump in with that.
Yeah, because
it has to be authentic.
It does, and a good employer brand cannot fix a company that doesn't have a desirable workplace once you get there. And so it's pretty important to kind of match up what you're advertising with what your employees are actually feeling and experiencing, or else you might get some turnover resulting if that's not matched up. So definitely make sure you feel good about your workplace before you do this. And
Did you guys do anything like anonymous surveys or anything to like kind of understand what your messaging should be? Because I know if you're at the top of an organization, no matter how big or small, you're always going to have a skew, not to say like things are going to be worse than what they are, but it's always going to be different than what you think, just because people are going to be hesitant to tell you they're good or bad honest feedback. So what did you guys do, I guess?
Yeah, so actually when we did our rebranding a couple of years ago, we decided to implement just an annual survey for some of our new hires, and we do it now at the end of each year to really figure out, why did you join Relativity, and do a few focus groups, why'd you stay? And see how that compares with our Pulse survey results, and see also how that compares with what candidates are looking for when we look into our candidate personas we're building out for the roles that we're trying to hire still. So we figure out, what's important to people, why they joined us, and then if we can also match that up with what people are looking for and offer it in sort of a unique way, great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there channels, and that's one thing I want to kind of talk about with you. Like how do you, because you have your product marketing team and you have your employee branding, so you guys work kind of hand in hand. Yeah. But I guess what aspects are man, maybe ask a 3-part question here, or at least a 2-part. What does your group take ownership of in terms of what channels and sites and aspects? Yeah. And then what do you have to work with more collaboratively with your product marketing teams?
So actually, our marketing department is completely kind of collaborative with us. We do not necessarily post ourselves on our social media channels. We have a social media team that does that, and they both work on product and employer brand. So it's really nice. We can all kind of cohesively work together, and they know what's going on the product side as well as work with us to know what's going on our end. But yeah, I would say they do most of our posting, but we really inform the content and maybe some of the campaign ideas that we want to do as well. So.
What channels, I guess, are best for you?
Yeah, I would say employer brand, Instagram is your friend. Definitely, obviously, the hashtag usage is good, but you can also do a lot more of the visual effects, which people connect with a bit more, I've seen. So a lot of the photos, the videos, the stories we've taken advantage of a lot. So not even necessarily having to have a formal post, but if we're at an event, it's just a real quick story of what we're up to. You can throw that on there pretty easily. LinkedIn and Facebook a little bit for employer brand as well, but then I would say Twitter is more for our product and industry group right now. Okay.
And the posts, so it's a mix of, when you go to industry events, I'm assuming you do like a lot of employee profiles and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Anything else that sticks out? I'm just trying to think of. We do a little bit of this too, so.
You're totally right. So we recently did a documentary series on the merits, which explains more of the purpose of our company. And so that could be a little teaser trailer for that. It could be an employee feature, photo or video, like a testimonial, or just kind of a day in the life.
I'm going to write that down, documentary series.
It could be, of course. And it could be, I don't know, it could be anything from a blog post that one of our employees has written and just posted on their own personal profile. But we think it's great content. We'd love to share that too. So it's a little bit of a mix of everything, I would say.
I guess another thing I want to ask is how long has the EB function been at Relativity? When did you start it, or when did it get going? How many years?
Going about 3 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
How have you measured the impact, I guess, from the time it started till now? Like what have you guys seen, I guess?
So definitely I would say metrics and return on investment for employer branding is always like the big ticket question, right? Because you're like, well, we're doing all these things and some of it may have more of an indirect impact and some of it I know is more direct, so what do you measure? A few things we're definitely looking at: employee referral rate. That helps us see the engagement a little bit internally with our employees. Are they proud to work for us and share this with other people? But we also look at things like time to fill. Are we around a good average or decreasing our time to fill? And then we look at spikes in like applicants, web traffic, things like that when we do different events. Or also if we have certain campaigns going on, we're going to look at that as well to see if those have kind of moved the needle or helped with any of that.
Yeah. I know working in recruiting, it's just for us, our own, I guess this is an employer brand, this will actually be our brand, but but I guess in this kind of scenario, we'd be the same as kind of your internal recruiters. It's easier to recruit when people have heard of you before, And when you're B2B, because you guys are B2B, we're B2B, like you're not a household name. So
for sure.
I've noticed like an uptick for us, like over time in the last like 5 years, especially, we've grown a lot and it's been better kind of word of mouth. Some of the stuff, it's easier to get people to call you back when they've actually heard of your company before. And I'm assuming that's probably been the rebrand was big for you guys first off, and then I've noticed you guys having a much higher profile, talking to people so anyway.
Absolutely. It's been huge for us, and I was going to say too, with just kind of having our brand ambassadors now and looking at how we can share more employee stories, as we've started to do that and get a little bit more transparent into what it's like to work at the company and the roles we have, we've definitely seen an increase in quality candidates. So we're seeing similar numbers of applicants, but in terms of how many get to on-site interview stages or hires, those have been definitely increasing just from our website or also some of the third-party platforms we work with content and whatnot. So I think really putting out the content that showcases who you are as a company and what people can expect, we seem to be getting more of the talent that we're looking for. And sometimes that turns away candidates because it's not what they're looking for, and that's totally okay. Like, we want to be transparent about who we are as business and show you what we can offer and what we can't. It'll match a lot of people and it won't match everyone. So that's actually okay.
I think that's why I think it's really great that you guys have been so proactive in this space, is that anyone who's followed the tech market in Chicago, because you're primarily hiring developers.
Definitely,
like that's most
heavily.
of your, and that's your hardest people to hire, right?
Probably like half our business
and
engineers.
It's just exploded in Chicago. The amount of startups. Like when I started in Chicago back in 2005, there weren't that many pure tech companies. Whereas now there's this whole ecosystem. There's but I mean, you live in the space all the time. So in order to stand out, it's just so much easier to get your job done when you have a kind of a good reputation. And people have heard of you and that type of thing. So because you're also competing against Google, you're competing against Facebook, you're competing against the places that everyone's heard of. So
it is so true. And I talk to students a lot because when I got out of college, I was like, oh, everyone wants to work for the brand names they've heard of, right? And get that on your resume. And honestly, you might have a fantastic working experience, but there's also so many companies out there that you haven't necessarily heard of that will provide you with so much opportunity for growth and a lot of good training as well. So if we can at least get the bit of recognition for the candidates we're looking to hire, that's definitely something we want to do. And whether it's opening emails from us or any reach out that our recruiters have, that's very helpful. And I think that this is kind of starting to help us by having this employer branding at the top of the funnel. So
cool.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to talk about? We kind of covered a lot, and
honestly, I think most of this is what I wanted to cover. In general, I mean, I could talk about this for days if we wanted to go on, but we definitely don't want to go on that rabbit hole.
Tangents of like the particulars of how to execute on certain things. But
I mean, honestly, I think with employer branding, it's just important to be really transparent and honest. I don't think I could ever work for a company where I didn't believe in the workplace and think it was a great environment to be in and grow in, and offer that honest feedback and transparency back to those looking at our company to potentially join us. It's a big decision when you're looking for a new job and all of that. So I think it's important to be transparent, and if you really provide the content about what you can truly offer, then you'll see some success with the people that you're bringing in. Yeah.
Cool.